The rain was tapping against the cafe window like a nervous habit, steady, restless, impossible to ignore. I watched the drops race down the glass while Martha sat across from me, stirring her coffee over and over. She wouldn't look at me, not once. I smiled, trying to lighten the air between us, but there was something different about her. A weight behind her eyes that no small talk could reach. The smell of coffee, the hum of quiet chatter, even the soft jazz in the background, everything felt slightly off. "You've been so distant lately," I said, leaning in. "Everything okay?" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She nodded, then shook her head, her hand trembling around the spoon. I noticed her nails, chipped, nervous, and realized she hadn't said a single word that mattered yet. My stomach tightened. I could feel it. That strange intuition women get when something's about to change. Then she finally spoke, and my world began to tilt. "Elena, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how." Her words were fragile, almost a whisper, but they hit me like glass breaking. I laughed nervously, pretending not to be scared. "You're scaring me. What is it?" I asked. She looked up for the first time, and there it was. Guilt, plain and raw. I didn't know it yet, but that look would haunt me long after the rain stopped. When she said his name, my heart forgot how to beat. "Tom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's been seeing someone else." For a second, I couldn't process the words. They just floated there, unreal, like smoke that refused to clear. My mind went blank, then flooded all at once. "You're wrong," I said, my voice sharper than I meant. But deep down, a quiet part of me, the part that noticed the late nights, the vague texts, already knew she wasn't. Martha's eyes filled with tears, and she looked small sitting across from me. "I tried to warn you," she said, her hands shaking, "but he asked me to stay silent." That sentence sliced deeper than the betrayal itself. I stared at her, trying to understand. "He asked you?" I repeated, my throat dry. The cafe noise blurred into nothing. All I could hear was the rain outside, relentless, like my heartbeat. She nodded, barely able to meet my eyes. "He said you didn't need to know." The words landed like a slap, not just because of what he did, but because she obeyed him. My best friend, my confidant. She chose his silence over my truth. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, feeling the warmth drain from my body, replaced by something cold and steady. The kind of cold that makes you see everything clearly. I looked down at my cup, watching the coffee ripple as if it could show me a way out of this moment. "So you knew," I said quietly. "All this time, you knew." My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. Too calm, too measured for what I felt inside. Martha reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back. The gesture was instinctive, almost defensive. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. But protection shouldn't feel like betrayal. The rain outside grew heavier, matching the pressure building in my chest. I thought of Tom, his easy smile, the way he'd look at me across the dinner table like I was his piece. Now those memories felt like cruel little performances. "He made your silence part of his lie," I said, not realizing I'd spoken aloud. Martha's lip quivered. She looked like she wanted forgiveness, but all I had to give was quiet disbelief. When I finally stood up, the chair scraped against the floor, loud and final. "I need to go," I said. My body moved before my mind caught up. As I walked out, the bell above the cafe door chimed, too gentle for the storm inside me. On the way home, my reflection in the rain-streaked glass looked unfamiliar, colder, sharper. I didn't know what I'd do next, only that this was the moment I stopped pretending everything was fine. When I got home, the house looked exactly the same. But I didn't feel like the same woman walking into it. My hands trembled as I set my purse down, and the sound of my keys hitting the counter felt louder than usual. The scent of Tom's cologne lingered in the hallway, warm and familiar, yet suddenly unbearable. I heard him in the kitchen, humming, carefree. For a second, I hated how normal he sounded. "Hey, you're home early," he said, smiling, moving toward me with that practiced charm that used to melt me. He kissed my cheek, and I flinched, not visibly, but enough for my body to register it. "How's Martha? Haven't seen her in forever." His voice was casual, perfectly innocent. I forced a smile, one I'd mastered over the years. "She said the same about you," I replied, my words heavier than he realized. He frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged, pretending to search for something in my purse. "Just that she misses how close everyone used to be." He laughed, actually laughed, as if I'd said something funny. I studied him then, really studied him, like he was a stranger wearing my husband's face. Everything about him looked the same, and yet, every detail now carried a different truth. Later that night, I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he scrolled through his phone, smiling faintly at something unseen. He didn't notice me. He rarely did when he thought I was out of sight. The television murmured in the background, but all I could hear was the echo of Martha's words replaying in my head. Every gesture, every blink felt like evidence I hadn't noticed before. My heart kept whispering, "Ask him." My mind whispered, "Wait." When he finally went to shower, I stood still for a long time before moving. My hands were cold when I reached for his jacket, the one he always left draped over the chair. Inside the pocket, my fingers brushed paper, crumpled, soft from handling. A receipt. I unfolded it, reading the name of a hotel one town over. The Golden Rose. My stomach dropped. The date printed at the top read last Thursday, the night of his so-called meeting. I gripped that small piece of paper so tightly it wrinkled under my fingers. My breathing turned shallow. For a moment, I just stared at it, as if looking hard enough could change what it said. But it didn't. It stayed there, silent and damning, the proof I never wanted. I leaned against the counter, letting the cold marble steady me. Martha was right. He hadn't just asked for her silence. He'd built his whole lie on it. I sat at the edge of the bed, the receipt still in my hand, while the sound of running water filled the silence between us. He was just behind that door, the man I'd built a life with, humming softly under the shower like nothing had changed. I stared at the pale reflection of myself in the mirror across the room. My face looked calm, almost detached, but inside, something fragile had cracked. It wasn't rage yet. It was realization. Part of me wanted to burst into the bathroom, wave the receipt in his face, demand every answer at once. But another part, the quieter, sharper part, told me to wait. To let him keep believing he was still in control. I could almost hear Martha's trembling apology again, but now it didn't sting. It focused me. Betrayal, I realized, has a strange way of clarifying who you are when the mask of love falls away. When Tom came out, towel around his waist, he smiled at me, completely unaware that the world had shifted. "You okay?" he asked, running a hand through his hair. I nodded, my voice steady. "Yeah, just tired." That night, I lay beside him without touching him once. My body still, my mind awake. By morning, I already knew. I wouldn't confront him with questions. I'd confront him with truth, quietly, carefully, on my terms. By the next evening, the shock had settled into something colder. Focus. I wasn't crying anymore. I was calculating. Every word, every look became part of a quiet rehearsal. I cooked dinner like always, chopping vegetables, tasting sauce, keeping my voice even. He came in, loosened his tie, and kissed my cheek like a man convinced he still lived in the comfort of his own illusion. I almost pitied him for it. Almost. We sat at the table, the soft clink of cutlery between us. "How was your Thursday night meeting?" I asked casually, watching his face instead of my plate. He didn't flinch. "Exhausting," he said. "We're closing that contract soon, though." Smooth, confident. He didn't even hesitate. The same man who couldn't fix a leaky faucet could lie without blinking. I smiled and nodded, as if the word meeting didn't taste bitter in my mouth. "Good," I said lightly. "You deserve a break. Maybe we should plan a weekend getaway." at the Golden Rose Hotel. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Small, sharp, unmistakable. What? He stammered. My pulse didn't race. I was the calmest I'd ever been. That's the hotel you went to, right? I said. The one where they print the name on the receipts? His face drained of color, and for a second, I thought he might deny even knowing what I was talking about. Elena, it's not what it looks like, he said, his voice suddenly softer, careful. The way a liar speaks when he realizes the room has shifted against him. I leaned back in my chair, studying him, not as my husband, but as a stranger I'd finally unmasked. Then tell me what it looks like, I said, because your meeting came with room service for 2. He opened his mouth, searching for words, excuses, anything that might stick. But lies lose their power once you see them clearly. You don't understand, he began, his hands moving restlessly. It's complicated. I almost laughed. That word, complicated, had become a shield for every betrayal in the world. No, I said quietly. It's actually very simple. I slid the receipt across the table like a verdict. This is what you call work? For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. The smell of dinner turned bitter in the air. He looked smaller than I remembered, like a man shrinking under his own lies. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly, steadying my breath. I don't need to hear your version, I said, my voice calm, final. I've already lived mine. And before he could speak again, I turned and walked away, not to escape, but to begin. I could still hear him calling my name as I walked down the hallway, his voice cracking with panic, the kind of desperation that only appears when consequences finally catch up. But I didn't turn around. I reached the bedroom, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were steady now. The trembling from before had vanished, replaced by something sharp, almost liberating. For the first time, I wasn't the woman asking why. I was the one deciding what next. I stared at the wedding photo on the dresser, the 2 of us smiling under a sky that looked too bright to be real. Back then, I thought love meant loyalty no matter what. Now I understood it differently. Love without honesty isn't love at all. It's performance. And I had played my part long enough. The thought didn't break me. It built me. Beneath the ache, there was a pulse of strength I hadn't felt in years. When I finally walked past him again, he was still sitting at the table, staring at the crumpled receipt. He didn't say a word. I didn't either. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was clarity. I knew what I needed to do, and who I needed to see. Martha might have been part of the lie, but she would be part of the reckoning too. Tomorrow I'd ask her not for comfort, but for help. The next morning, I walked back into the same cafe where my world had cracked open. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like yesterday's storm. Martha was already there, sitting at our usual table, twisting a napkin in her hands. When she saw me, her shoulders tensed, maybe expecting anger, maybe rejection. I sat down, calm and composed, because fury wasn't what I felt anymore. What I wanted now was clarity and justice. You should have told me the moment you found out, I said, keeping my voice even. Her eyes filled instantly, tears she didn't bother to hide this time. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want to ruin your marriage. I took a slow breath, watching the guilt ripple across her face. You didn't ruin it, I said quietly. He did, but you're going to help me end it. She looked up, startled, like she hadn't expected forgiveness, let alone purpose. For a second, she just stared, searching my expression for anger. But what she found was resolve, the kind that doesn't shout, it plans. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. Tell me everything, I said. Dates, messages, what he said to you, every detail. She hesitated, then nodded. And in that small, trembling motion, our quiet alliance was born. Not out of vengeance alone, but out of truth. Martha slid her phone across the table, her hands shaking. "I saved the messages," she said softly. "I couldn't delete them, even when I wanted to." I opened the thread, scrolling through his words. Familiar phrasing wrapped in deceit. "You're doing the right thing. She doesn't need to know." And the one that made my stomach turn. "I'll make it worth your silence." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep reading. Every word was a thread, and together they formed the web he'd spun. "He offered you gifts?" I asked quietly. She nodded, eyes low. "I never took anything. I swear. I just froze. I thought it would all fall apart on its own." I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had carried my husband's secret like a stone in her chest. I believed her. "You did freeze," I said. "But you're not frozen now." I copied every message, every date, every proof. My fingers didn't shake once. When I looked up, Martha was crying silently. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I sipped my coffee, the taste sharper now, almost bitter. "I'm going to let the truth do what it does best," I said. "Expose everything." For the first time in months, I felt steady. Not the fragile kind of steady that comes from denial, but the grounded certainty of a woman reclaiming her own story. Martha exhaled, nodding. We weren't just friends anymore. We were witnesses. That night, I waited for him in the living room. The folder sat on the coffee table, neatly closed, like a secret daring to be opened. When Tom walked in, he smiled, tired, distracted, carrying the weight of another ordinary day. But when he saw my face, he froze. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice unsure. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down," I said. My tone wasn't angry. It was steady. The kind of steady that made him nervous. He sat, glancing at the folder. "What is this?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Proof," I said simply. "Of every lie you asked Martha to hide, every word you used to buy silence." His jaw tightened. "Elena, please." I lifted a hand, stopping him cold. "Don't," I said. "You had your chance to speak months ago." I opened the folder, sliding the printed messages and the hotel receipt toward him. "I'm done being quiet. You made my silence part of your lie. Now it's my weapon." He looked down at the evidence, then back at me, the man who once thought he could charm his way out of anything suddenly speechless. "You can't destroy me like this," he said finally, voice trembling. I stood, the faintest smile curving my lips. "Destroy you?" I said softly. "No, Tom, I'm just revealing what you built." I placed the divorce papers beside the folder, then turned toward the door. "You can keep your lies. I'm keeping my voice." By the next morning, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Every emotion that once clouded my judgment had sharpened into purpose. I sat at my desk, scrolling through the evidence, the hotel receipt, the text messages, the trail of deceit he thought would stay buried. Tom loved pretending his life was spotless, perfect husband, dedicated executive, man of integrity. I smiled at the thought of how fragile that illusion really was. It only took one truth to break it. I sent the emails just after sunrise, quiet, efficient, undeniable. A message to HR with attachments labeled simply, "For internal review, misuse of company funds and ethics violation." His business trips, his client dinners, all suddenly looked like what they were: personal indulgences paid with company money. I didn't need to add commentary. The facts spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Truth doesn't shout. It detonates silently. By noon, the fallout began. Missed calls. Messages from unknown numbers. A text from Tom. "We need to talk. Please." I didn't reply. I could picture him at the office, pale, sweating through his suit, the golden reputation crumbling piece by piece, and I felt calm. Not vengeful, not gleeful, just free. It was strange how justice could sound like silence, the same silence he once demanded from me. He came home that evening like a ghost, pale, trembling. A man stripped of every layer of arrogance. The sound of his car door slamming was sharp, desperate. I was sitting in the living room when he burst in, tie askew, eyes wild. "You destroyed me!" he shouted, voice breaking. I didn't move. I'd spent years reacting to his moods, soothing his anger, softening his edges. Not anymore. I just looked at him, the man who'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. "No," I said evenly. "You destroyed us." The words left my mouth slow and measured, each one hitting harder because they were calm. "I just made sure everyone saw what you built on lies." He shook his head, pacing, hands in his hair like someone trapped. "You've ruined everything," he cried. "My job, my reputation." I stood up, finally, meeting his panic with stillness. "Your reputation?" I asked softly. "That's all this was to you, wasn't it?" He stared at me, breathing hard, speechless for once. I stepped closer, close enough to see the cracks in his composure. "You cared more about keeping your image intact than keeping your promises," I said. "You taught me that silence keeps men comfortable. I just decided to stop making you comfortable." His eyes filled, with regret or just fear of consequence, I couldn't tell. But it didn't matter anymore. My silence had served its purpose. It had ended him. He stood there for a long time, like a man waiting for a sentence he already knew was coming. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I'd done all that in another lifetime. "You always said I overreacted," I told him, "that I made problems where there weren't any. But tell me, Tom, what do you call this?" He didn't answer. His silence was the truest thing he'd ever given me. I reached for the door, opened it slowly, and stepped aside. "You can go now," I said. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something that might save him, but there was nothing left to say. Everything between us had already been said, just not out loud. I watched him walk down the driveway, his shoulders hunched, the weight of exposure heavy on his back. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to chase, to fix, to forgive. His chaos no longer belonged to me. It was finally his to carry. Alone. When the door clicked shut, the sound was soft but final. I leaned against it for a moment, breathing in the quiet, a quiet that felt different now. Not the silence of fear or denial, but the kind that comes when truth has finally been spoken. The house was still, empty, yet somehow lighter. I turned off the lights, walked upstairs, and thought of how tomorrow I'd wake up without waiting for anyone's version of the truth but my own. Months later, I found myself back at the same cafe, the place where everything had fallen apart, and somehow, where it had also begun. The rain was lighter this time, just a gentle drizzle against the window. I sat alone, my coffee warm between my hands, no longer afraid of silence. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. I opened my laptop, the small microphone icon glowing on the screen, waiting for me to begin recording the next episode of my new podcast. "Breaking the silence," I said softly into the mic, smiling. The name had come to me one night while lying awake, thinking of all the women who'd been taught to keep their pain quiet. Today I want to talk about control, the kind that hides behind kindness, the kind that asks you to stay silent for someone else's comfort. My voice didn't shake. It carried. Strong, certain, and free. The kind of voice I once wished I had. I hit stop, listening to the echo fade through my headphones. The sound wasn't just my voice, it was proof of survival. Proof that pain, when spoken aloud, loses its power. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me, and whispered to myself. He asked someone to stay silent to protect his secret, but my silence was never his to control. And in that moment, I knew I'd never stay quiet again. I started receiving messages from listeners, women from everywhere, each with their own story of silence. Some whispered their truths in long emails. Others sent short notes that simply said, "Thank you. I thought I was alone." Reading them felt like holding hands with strangers in the dark, each of us passing the light forward. I realized then that revenge wasn't the end of my story. It was the bridge to something bigger, the courage to turn my pain into purpose. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that version of me sitting across from Martha, heartbreaking over coffee. I wish I could reach back and tell her, "You'll make it out, and you'll come back stronger." But maybe that's why I tell these stories now, so another woman doesn't have to wait for her world to collapse before she finds her voice. The past no longer hurts, it teaches. And every episode I record, I reclaim another piece of myself he tried to bury. As the cafe emptied, I packed up my laptop and slipped my phone into my bag. Outside, the air smelled of rain and something clean. Renewal. I paused by the door, glancing once more at the table where it all began, and smiled. "Sometimes," I whispered, "the loudest revenge is peace." I stepped into the light drizzle, no longer hiding from the sound of my own voice. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a beginning.